Welcome, family, to our video theology teaching for this weekend. It's always a pleasure being in your presence, and it's always a pleasure just, connecting with you again. I really enjoyed, especially, following our one on one sessions. I must say, I've been particularly enjoying those one on one sessions with you all, and I know that we still have a few more to get through, and I'm still going to meet with many of you, and I'm really looking forward to that. And I think it's been such a blessing. Something that I did not actually anticipate is, I think, the experience of actually finally meeting the people that I speak to all the time, because I make a lot of content on TikTok, on different platforms, and on anywhere. I communicate a lot on WhatsApp, on TikTok, but I never really actually meet the people that I'm actually, ministering to. So it's been such an incredible journey of meeting you, and I think it's really profoundly impacted me because it's really helped me learn how to serve with more intention, because I feel like now I kind of know what the people that I'm actually serving need a little bit better. And just also just getting just to know you in general, your walk with Christ, when you got saved, what you expect from the program. All of those things have been so amazing, and I keep saying this, I'm also quite impressed at how well everybody is doing. um you know Everybody really has their socks up. Everybody's really trying, even if someone is slightly behind. They really are trying just to constantly get in the culture of catching up, and I would just like to say well done. And I'd also just like to say, something that I found during the one-on-one session is that first of all, there's no one who's like chronically behind yet. I don't know, maybe in the next week when I'm about to meet with everyone else, but most people are generally on par, maybe just like a day or two behind, if anyone is behind. I just want to say, try and get yourself in the habit of not allowing anxiety to pile up. If you are behind, just send me an email, just send me a text, just request a one-on-one. Let me know, look, last week was so hard for me, I couldn't catch up. Now I'm a bit overwhelmed, I've got so much work, I don't quite know how to get back on track. And we can try figure that out. That's the whole purpose of the program, is to help you consistently keep up with reading the Bible. So please don't get into a shell of condemnation or anxiety and guilt if you do end up, sort of getting stuck and falling behind the class. As soon as possible, just reach out to me. There's always grace, there's always mercy, and that's the whole purpose of this program. I don't expect that everything's going to be perfect 100% of the time. I do expect there will be some times when you do need some assistance, and that's exactly why this program is here. And as we just go ahead with our teaching and video theology session of today, we're going to be crossing over into the book of Leviticus, and you're going to see that as you start with your Bible reading for next week. So you're going to see that we're reading the book of Exodus, and we're also going to cross over into the book of Leviticus at some point during the week. And I would just like for you, during the week we're going to cross over into Leviticus. But I would just like for you to please read the outline for the book of Leviticus. As you are aware, our culture here at One Bible 7 Months is that each and every time before we begin reading a book, we're going to go back to our Bible study guide. At this point, you should already have a Bible study guide. You should know where to find it. You should know how to navigate through it. You should know how to see exactly which day we're on, the reading for the day. So in as much as I already post these things on Google Classroom, it's really up to you to have a look at the Bible study guide. It has days 1 all the way to days, I think 210 or something, until the end of the course, telling you what to do on each and every single day, because let's just say, for example, for one reason or another, I can't upload on Google Classroom the teachings for that day. I'm relying on your own due diligence to read the Bible study guide to see, okay, today's teaching is day 18, therefore we're reading 1, 2, 3. It's quite straightforward in the Bible study guide. And you'll see that there's a section that has a summary of all of the books, and that's what we read before we actually start reading the book in question. And because we are preparing to read the book of Leviticus, you will see that there is a separate video outlining the book of Leviticus. And I think at this point we should get the gist. I think we kind of already have an idea of who wrote the book of Leviticus. We already know the general details, because they're quite similar to the other two books, right? Moses wrote it because it's part of the Torah around the same time frame as the other two books, but just please go through that just so you can see the purpose of the book, because the purpose of the book is very, very, very important, and you must find that out for yourself. And also, one of the scholars rather in the program that I was just meeting up with during the week, she was telling me that she really enjoys the reflective questions at the end of each outline. So if you have a look at that Bible study guide, each outline for each specific Bible in the book has reflective questions at the bottom. And for example, the reflective question can be something like, what did the golden calf of Moses represent? And if you are someone who's new to reading the Bible, you might not necessarily have an understanding of what that calf is. You might not even know what that calf is all about. So as you are reading this question, it sort of prepares you to know what's important, so that when you do come across the golden calf, when you're reading your text, you're like, oh, that's the golden calf and that's what it represents. So please get in the habit of just going through the reflective questions, even if you just read them. Just read them, that's sufficient, because it will help you just to know what to look out for when you actually start with the Bible reading. And something else that I think is so interesting, a tip that someone was telling me that she does, is that she told me that what she likes to do is she likes to actually read one day in advance. So every single day in the course, she likes to sort of be one day ahead. And she says she does this because it's sort of a mitigating plan, just in case life gets in the way, just in case something urgent happens and her time is sort of impacted, or maybe something happens that sort of derails her emotionally or spiritually. She doesn't want the pressure of now having to catch up as well. So she says that strategy of always being one day ahead sort of helps her, and I think it's a really great tip for anyone who is looking to constantly be up to par with the rest of the class. But family, let's go ahead and just outline our reading and teaching for this week. Like I said, we're going to be exploring deeper the book of Exodus and also bridging over into the book of Leviticus. And one of the key frames in the book of Leviticus is this instance where we see where, God says to his people, look, I'm taking you out of Israel. We see a really, really great showdown. We see that, God parts the seas. If the people are super, super excited, they're super excited. But I think they're also just sort of stunned and a bit probably just like trying to figure out, is this real? Like, what's really going on here, But we see an instance where a lot of activity takes place, because we see that God parts the seas. Once they are out of Egypt, they get to the wilderness. Once they get to the wilderness, they're super thirsty. Moses takes a stick, he bangs on one of the rocks there, and suddenly miraculous water comes out. They can all drink. When they get hungry, there's this mysterious bread from the sky that starts falling. When they want meat, there's these random birds that are just ready just to give them, or offer them meat rather. All of these miracles are just happening around them, and it's really God showing off his power and saying, look, you are my people and I want you to get to know who I am. And they are so spiritually sensitive, and they're also so hurt and abused from 400 years of slavery, generational pain, that even while they are seeing all of these things, a lot of Egypt is still in them. The mindset of Egypt, the oppression of Egypt, the pain of Egypt, and I think also the idols of Egypt, the gods of Egypt, because 400 years is a really long time. And I think over the time when the Israelites were there, their faith got, really, really impacted. They probably began to also believe in these other Egyptian gods and also entertain them, and you're going to see as you read through the text of Exodus that they begin doing some of the things that were done in Egyptian culture, because, well, that's just what they used to. So now we see an instance where, God says, you know what, it is my heart that all of my people, gets to actually be priests in their own right. So it was actually the design of God that priesthood must not be a thing exclusive to one man. He wanted the head of each household, that is the husband figure of each household, to have an exclusive relationship with him. He wanted the head of his household to be a priest in his own right, a priest in his own home. And the idea is that he wanted to lead the husband. He wanted to lead the priest of the family, so that by the connection that he has with God, that same virtue, that same essence, that same glory, anointing is able to really trickle down into the rest of the family unit, so that the wife can also have access to God, so that the children can also have access to God, right? Because while there's a priest in the home, so the design of God was that he wanted each head of the household to have exclusive priesthood with him. And that's why he actually called all of the men in the congregation and said, look, I want you all to go down to the base of the mountain. I want you to consecrate yourselves, cleanse yourself spiritually and physically, and be expectant to have an encounter with me at the base of this mountain, because I am going to come down so that you and I can have an exclusive, meeting, really. And we see an instance when, okay, the children of Israel, they get ready, they all go down to the base of this mountain. They're really excited, or probably a little bit nervous, I don't really know. But we see that sort of the scene changes and the sky gets dark. There's lightning, there's thunder, the mist comes down the mountain, and the presence of God begins just to come down on them, and they begin trembling in fear, and they say, whoa, 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 hold up. You know what? Actually, Lord, this is really, really great. But you know what? This is a little bit too scary. Can you please just choose Moses? Just speak to him. He will give us all of your messages. It's fine. It's enough. Okay. So it was really probably like quite not the best for God, because he really wanted all of them to have exclusive access to him, and they were like, nah, we good, And honestly, I often judge the Israelites for that, but I think I've come to realize, maybe they were just so hurt, and maybe they still carry so much pain from Egypt, that all of these things were a bit overwhelming. It was just too much. It's the parting of the seas, it's the mysterious bread falling down, it's the mysterious bread birds giving meat, the rocks that are spewing out water, all of these different miracles happening. And they probably just kind of felt like this is a bit scary, so maybe they were just overwhelmed by everything, and we see that they decided, you know what, no, God, just speak to Aaron exclusively, not Aaron, speak to Moses exclusively, and he will tell us your message. And so Israel sort of gets into this understood rhythm where Moses would go on the mountain, for however long, and he would come back, and he would go and he would come back. And the idea is that, he would speak to God and basically tell his brother Aaron and the rest of the Israelites what God is saying. And we see that, as this interaction is happening, there's one instance where Moses goes like normal, and he just does not come back. He's gone, and he's gone, and he's gone, and he's gone. And the Israelites are panicking. They are really wondering, okay, this guy went, like, where is he now? So they ask his brother Aaron, they're like, hey, Aaron, Moses, this fellow, he's gone. Where is he at? And Moses is like, well, you know where he's at. He went up the mountain. And they say, well, is he ever even going to come back? They start panicking. They start getting scared and sort of start complaining. They had a lot of complaining in the wilderness. They just get into the cycle of complaining. Why did you bring us here in the first place if he's just going to leave us? They just kind of go off on a tangent. They were a very rebellious group of people. And we see something so interesting in this frame. We see that, as a result of the frustration of the Israelites, while Moses is gone, right, they tell Aaron, they're like, hey, Aaron, look, we don't know where this guy went or if he will even come back, but we need God, okay? And, well, we can't meet with God because we already tried that, did not work out. So what we're going to do is ask you, Aaron, to create a little calf for us, okay? We've got this extra gold that we got from the Egyptians when we were fleeing, because God caused them to give us all of this gold. So we're going to give you this gold, you're going to melt it for us, and you're going to carve out and mold out an image, okay? It's going to be a golden calf. And this golden calf is going to represent God for us. That is going to be the representation of God, because while Moses is gone, so you have to understand that in these days, connection to God, or a God, even if it was not God per se, connection to a God in general was very, very paramount. These people had a lot of superstitions, and they also understood that in order for anything to actually prosper in life, a spiritual interaction was needed. And for this reason, they always knew that they always had to give sacrifices, or they always had to do something. And because Moses was gone, well, How were they going to do all these things? So they say, look, this calf, that's where all of these things are going to happen. We're going to sacrifice to it. We're going to do everything to it. That will be our God. And for some reason, Aaron does this. I don't quite know why. I've never quite understood why Aaron decided to actually do it. Was he doing it because he was scared of them, and he didn't know what to say to them? He didn't know how to say no to them because they were quite, like rebellious. Or was he also of the same view, like, okay, yeah, you know what, this guy has been gone for a while. This is not such a bad idea, because the Bible tells us that he did do it, and they were all happy, and they all began, doing their festivals, dancing around this calf, doing the most, it was their God. They were all happy, and while while Moses is up at the mountain and having this divine encounter with God, right? Because we see that God was actually giving Moses a lot of spiritual intel. He was giving him the 10 commandments, just a lot of things. A lot of the information that we get in the Torah was actually found in these exclusive moments that God shared with Moses while he was on Mount Sinai. And we see that while God is speaking to Moses, God is like, hold up, something's happening here. And God is like, wait, these people, while you have been up here, have created a whole image, okay, that is supposed to represent me. That golden calf is supposed to be me. God was livid. God was furious. Okay, he was furious to the brim. Okay, and you have to understand that the Israelites came from a culture that were in Egyptian culture, they had different gods. They had a god of the frogs. Like, why would you have a god of the frogs? They had a god of the sun. They had a god of strength. They had a god of everything, the god of the waters, the god of the Nile, a god of everything. And these gods were represented by different physical structures where they would actually give sacrifices. So a lot of Egypt was so engraved in them that when the true God is trying to have genuine or loving relationship with them, they were not able to reciprocate that. And it reminds me so much of a toxic relationship. If someone has ever been in a toxic relationship, a guy or a girl, and you just don't really know, or you're not used to being loved the correct way, you're so used to a harsh environment, a toxic environment, things that look like love, but they're not love. When someone finally brings the person who is able to love you properly, the resistance to submit to this love, the resistance to actually accept the true, genuine love is really there sometimes. And we see that the Israelites were going through that. Here's God saying, look, I am true God, and they were still stuck in the cycle of toxic Egyptian gods and Egyptian mindsets and the oppression and the 400 years of slavery. God is saying, here I am. I want to give you the real thing. And they were like, no, we want a golden calf. That's who you are. And this made God livid. And Moses intercedes because he sees, the anger of God, and he says, Lord, wait, remember, this is your covenant people. What will the other nations say when they see that, you have wiped out all of them? Because God was like, look, I am so angry. Moses, I'm going to wipe everybody out. I will start a whole new nation with just you. And Moses says, no, remember your covenant with Abraham. Remember your covenant with our forefathers. What will all these nations say when they see that you wiped everybody out in the wilderness? But it's not that he said no because it wasn't what he wanted per se. He said no because someone interceded, which is so powerful because it tells us that God, even though he has made up his mind about something, even though he has set judgment about something, he will still listen to the intercession of someone else. And that's why praying for people is so important, because yes, judgment might already be there. But if someone intercedes to say, Lord, remember, this is your child who you love. God says, because of this intercession, I will withhold what I wanted to do, and I will preserve the covenant of Abraham. And we see that God says, you know what, Moses, it's fine. It's fine. And it was really Moses who saved the situation. It was Moses. He says, it's fine. I will not wipe them all out. And he says, I will remember the covenant that I have with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And we see then that the covenant is renewed again. And In this frame, we also see that God reveals his name and his nature. Some of the really key revelations from this frame is that, the calf was intended to actually represent God. So the Israelites, I don't think they were trying to replace God. I don't think they were trying to say, look, this calf um, is God in the sense that he is now the gold. I don't think that they were trying to say that. They were just saying, look, this is going to be a depiction of God for us, just so that we have something to look at. And we see that, the calf intended to represent God, but not actually to replace him. But because of how much that resembled the theologies and the idolatry of Egypt, it was all blasphemous to God. It was everything about it was just blasphemous to God. But we also see that a key insight here is that intercession preserved the covenant and not the innocence of the Israelites. So the intercession of Moses really preserved the covenant that God had with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. It was not because the Israelites were free of guilt. They were very guilty. They were very wrong for creating the golden calf. But Moses wasn't saying, Lord, excuse them because they are right. He was saying, look, they are wrong, but remember your covenant. So what the intercession did is that it preserved the covenant and not the innocence of the people, which is really, really something that I think is overlooked quite a lot. And we also see that God does not hold on to, things like a lot. He lets them go. If God decides to forgive, he forgives, because we see that immediately after that, he was merciful to them. He was very merciful. He was very loving again to them. So God reveals his mercy immediately after the judgment and not before it, which is amazing. So our next frame, we see that, okay, now, God says, I'm going to give you, Moses, the instructions for how to build a tabernacle. A tabernacle is sort of a place where the presence of God can dwell. But because the Israelites were in the wilderness, obviously, it was not going to be a stable structure, because the idea was for them to be in the wilderness for 3 days, right? So they were not going to build a temple there, because it was not the promised land. They were still journeying somewhere. So the tabernacle was really just a place, a temporary place, where the presence of God would dwell. And in this frame, the tabernacle is constructed. We see that different kinds of offerings were given by the Israelites. And we also see that the glory of God fills the tabernacle. And some of the really, really key, interesting revelations that are often missed here is the fact that Israel follows instructions to the T this time around. So when it comes to, them knowing what to do with the tabernacle, how to construct it and everything, they really, really, really are quite obedient. I think now they realize, okay, let's not play with God, okay? And we also see that glory comes after obedience and not emotion. So the glory of God comes after the Israelites are obedient. So not because of the emotions that the Israelites would, the tantrums that they would do. The glory of God didn't come because they were like, God, we're hungry, we want food. Oh God, this and this, because they kept doing that. But the glory of God didn't come throughout all of the complaining. So the glory of God won't manifest in our complaining. We can complain all the time. Yo, but Lord, but I've been here for so long. Yo, but Lord, this stagnation, whatever, But the glory of God does not manifest in complaining. It manifests in obedience. So we see that now, because they were following the instructions to a T, the glory of God comes because of that obedience. And the glory of God fills the tabernacle, right? Only once the full work was completed. So and the idea here is that God will fill what is being built according to his pattern. So God will acknowledge. He will fill, he will allow his glory to indwell in what his pattern prescribes, right? So if he gives instructions, and if those instructions are followed in obedience, then God will show up, which is really, really amazing. Something else that I think is so interesting, in this frame is When Moses came down from the mountain, right? So now after interceding, now he's also quite angry because he's probably like, sure, like, do you know what God was about to do? God was about to wipe you guys all out, you know? So he comes down from he comes down from the mountain. He's super, super angry. He's holding these 10 commandments that God had given him because God had given him the 10 commandments on stone. He's holding them. And when he gets to the base of the mountain, he smashes them because he's so angry, right? He's so angry when he sees this calf. And as he's smashing them, something that's so interesting shows up because we see that throughout scripture there are these random bursts of anger that Moses has. There's these random bursts of anger, but this is one of the most pronounced, and there is a particular reason why Moses acts out in these releases of anger, and the reason is a generational curse that runs in the bloodline of Levi. So if you remember, Jacob, just before Jacob died, remember Jacob had the 12 sons, Reuben, so and so, so and so, all the way up to Benjamin, right? When he was just about to die, he was blessing all of his sons. He was saying, okay, you are going to be this, you are going to be that, you are going to be this. And when he got to the bloodline of Levi, he said to to Levi and to Simeon, he said to the both of you, because you've got this fierce anger, you just have these anger outbursts. He says, cursed be your anger, for it is fear, and because your wrath is cruel. So Jacob proclaimed a curse upon the house of Levi and upon the house of Simeon. He said, because of you two individuals, your house, your generations from now on, are going to be cursed with the affliction of anger. And Aaron and Moses are from the Levi bloodline. So we see that generational curses are no respecter of men. Yes, you can be called by God, but if that thing is not addressed by someone in the bloodline to say, Lord, our family struggles with 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, anger or whatever, or lying or whatever. If someone does not stand the gap to actually close that door, that curse will remain in the bloodline. And unfortunately, that curse kept finding expression throughout Moses' life, even though he was called, which really resembles a lot of our lives. Yes, we are called. Yes, we're walking with God. But these curses that were proclaimed upon people in our bloodline sometimes come to speak in our lives. And it's up to us to actually repent and say, Lord, forgive so-and-so for doing whoever. Forgive my ancestors for their idolatry. And please remove the curses that came upon us as a result of that. So in this frame, we see that God begins to teach the Israelites how to actually worship him. He begins to sort of give them a blueprint of, okay, this is the tabernacle, and these are some of the other things that you're going to do along with, having the tabernacle. This is how you're going to worship me. This is how, he begins to teach them what true worship actually looks like. And part of that is that God introduces different types of offerings, right? He teaches the Israelites that, okay, so there's different kinds of offerings, and you're going to offer me these offerings under these conditions, and that this is what each offering means. And God also establishes a sacrificial system for how the Israelites should actually give sacrifices to him. And some of the key revelations, that are often missed in this frame is the meaning of the different types of offerings. And I think this is so interesting because, for a very long time, I always would read, they would give a burnt offering. They would burn whatever animal and it would represent this and that. But I never quite understood what do all of these, offerings mean. And here's, just a little bit of insight about what each offering means and the types of offerings that God had actually introduced. One of them was a burnt offering, right? And a burnt offering, basically, the purpose of it is total surrender to God. It's total devotion. And this kind of offering means, Lord, I belong fully to you. And the next kind of offering that we see that was introduced is the grain offering. This is the meal offering, right? And the purpose of this offering is really for purpose, and it's also for dedication of work and provision. So it's saying, Lord, every single thing that I have, my salary from my job, my businesses, I'm so thankful to you. I'm showing you gratitude because you have blessed the works of my hand. And the offering is saying my work and my provision is given to God, right? They are given to God and they're also given from God. The next offering is the peace offering. I really love this one. And the purpose of this one is for fellowship. It's for Thanksgiving. And this offering is saying, I am at peace with God. So whenever they would offer a peace offering, it was saying, Lord, I am aligned with you. I'm at peace with you and your will for my life. The next offering was the guilt or the trespass offering. And, this one took place when restoration, harm, or loss occurred. If there was some sort of breach that took place, some sort of mistake or something that was not supposed to happen, that happened, or even a sin that took place, this offering was saying, I will make it right again with God, right? So the guilt or the trespass offering was saying, I will make it right with God. So the sin offering was really just to atone for guilt, to atone for trespass, to atone for anything that took place contrary to the will or the laws of God. So let's go over through to our next frame. And in our next frame, we see that this is really when God begins to introduce priesthood, because now the Israelites have said, look, no, just select, Moses as a priest. We don't want to speak to you directly. And God says, okay, fine. But God creates his own system. So he says, I'm going to choose the bloodline of Aaron. Even though Moses is the greater, prophet, or the greater, priest, the bloodline of Aaron is the one that's actually going to be set apart for ministry. The bloodline of Aaron is the one that's going to be set apart for priesthood. And that's the reason as to why even today we have certain bloodlines and families that are set apart for priesthood. So we see that in this particular frame, Aaron and his sons are consecrated. So God says, look, Moses, I want you to consecrate Aaron and his sons. I want you to prepare them for this task of them being the priests on my behalf and on behalf of all of these people. And we see that the priestly ministry actually starts. This is the start of ministry as we know it today. And because of the sort of inauguration that takes place, or whatever you want to call it, an inauguration, or this sort of consecration that takes place, right? We see that fire comes down from God, and God comes to consume the offering that was offered, for the representation of this priesthood. And that's really God saying, I am with this particular thing that you're doing. I am in agreement with what you're doing over here. The key insight in this frame is the fact that God only, God really has conditions for when he will manifest or when his glory will come down. And we see here that God's fire only falls down, it only consumes the offering, once the priest and the sacrifice were ready. So God really is a God of order. He responds to preparedness. He didn't just allow, his presence just to come before everything was done. He waited for the order of things. Only when, the priest and the sacrifice were aligned and ready did his fire actually come to consume. So in our next frame, we see, we sort of move away from sort of the mechanics or the instructions of everything. One of the sons of Aaron that were ordained, right? They were consecrated for priesthood is Nadab and Abihu. And we're told that, during this inauguration ceremony that's taken place, maybe not exactly at the same time, but during the processes of the inauguration, we see that these two sons of Aaron, even though they were set apart, they were exclusively, to be in close proximity to God by virtue of being priests. They sort of thought this to be, access to God that allowed them to just get away with a few things that God did not actually allow. And we see that Nadab and Abihu, they offered unauthorized fire to God. So God did not tell them to offer any fire. He did not actually say to them, look, bring this incense, bring this fire to me. They just, in their own assumption, took the fire, took the incense, and burned it up to God. And God said, just because you are priests, it does not mean that you can just do what you want, even if you are within close proximity to me. And unfortunately, the Bible tells us that the fire of God came down and immediately consumed them, and they died immediately. And we see that this is the first time when God begins to place boundaries on priesthood. This is the first time when we see that God begins to say, look, you being called, there are still systems, there are still ways for you to do this. You don't just get to do whatever it is that you want to do. You have to be in submission to me as God, right? So we see that God actually places boundaries for priesthood. And if many of the preachers of today would actually just observe and respect the boundaries that God has put in the ministry of priesthood, so many more people would be saved from false prophets, honestly. And one of the key lessons that we learn from the story of Nadab and Abihu is the fact that we should not be over familiar with God. We should not get in the habit of just being over familiar with God, because we've got Jesus, we've got the Holy Spirit, we are in relationship with God. It does not give us the right to actually cross certain boundaries, because we are priests in our own right, because now we do have access to the Holy Spirit. We have individual access to the Holy Spirit now, as opposed to the Old Testament, right? And we see that familiarity without reverence is dangerous. If we are going to be over familiar with God without having the due reverence for God, it's very, very dangerous, and we can find ourselves really being in situations that can bring a lot of harm and not good to us. The key revelations here is that their sin was an assumption. So they were assuming that, this is the right thing to do. But that assumption really cost them a lot, because they thought that they can just sort of wing it, And no, God does not subscribe well to winging if He did not tell you to wing it. And the other really missed revelation here is that proximity does not remove protocol. You might be close to God, but you must still do things in order. There must still be protocol in whatever it is that you do. It's true, you might be someone who, has a lot of favor on their lives, but that does not mean that you must not be excused from praying, or from, fasting, or from all of these things. Proximity does not remove protocol. And let's just move over through to our last frame, which is going to be quite short. And in this frame, we see that a lot of dietary laws are introduced by God. So God begins to draw a distinction between foods that are considered to be clean and foods that are considered to be unclean, right? And we see here that, a key revelation that is actually missed is that the laws concerning food, they're really training discernment, right? And for you to be able to discern whether it is pleasing for God for certain foods to be eaten, and it's showing a distinction between what God considers as clean and unclean, right? And we also see that it moves holiness from the altar to real life. So it sort of fills the gap to say the practices of the kingdom, the practices of priesthood, they're not all like far there by the altar, there by the priests. No, even in our everyday lives, we still need to be able to observe holiness. And what this does is that it moves holiness to the everyday lives of the Israelites. And you'll see as we journey into the New Testament that even though, yes, there are what is considered unclean foods and clean foods, Paul does make a distinction and just a little bit of emphasis in teaching regarding, eating clean and unclean foods. And if you want to just quickly just Google that or research that, you can just do that in your spare time, just to see, following Christ, what the teaching regarding clean and unclean food is.